Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we are going to be discussing how to play the Seer Council Detachment in the Eldari Codex. As you guys probably know by now, the Seer Council is quickly becoming my favorite detachment. It has so many options, so many different things it can do. It's tons of stratagems, tons of variety in the kind of units that you want to play with, and it uses units differently than what you'd normally consider running, to be quite frank. You would never consider running some of the units that you can in Seer Council and that can be effective in Seer Council in other detachments. Especially with all the rage around Aspect Warriors right now. Of course, Aspect Warriors are still going to be in the detachment because they're really good, but they're going to be used in some different ways because of how the detachment is. So, without further ado, let us go ahead and dive right into it and talk about why the Seer Council is so good, how to use it on the battlefield, and just why it is absolutely amazing and, in my honest opinion, an underrated. Okay, so we are going to be going over the detachment ability enhancements and stratagems of the detachment. I'll kind of talk you guys through why they're good or why they're not properly taking, and basically how the stratagems work. I'm going to also be talking about the best units in the detachment and why they're the best. We're going to be talking about general strategies, strengths, and weaknesses of the detachment and how to get around them. I'm going to show you guys a close to optimal example army list that I've been using in my own games, which I'm probably still going to tweak over time, but that I really like and that I think is very effective so far. And a rundown of how to set up and use the army simulator with, some examples and cool kind of things you can do. Okay, so forgive me for not having a picture yet of the codex. I'm still waiting for it to be delivered to my home so that I can finally have it on the app so I can, take screenshots and put them up here. But I did kind of write it down for you guys. So basically, the detachment ability is like this. At the start of the battle round, roll 3, 6, or 9 dice, depending on the size of the battle. So 6 for Strike Force games. Of course, it's going to be 3 for Version and 9 for Onslaught, but you're going to probably be rolling 6 of them for Strike Force 2,000 point games. And the numbers shown on the dice correspond to a particular stratagem that you can discard the dice for, discount that stratagem's CP. So essentially, you roll your dice, the dice correspond to a stratagem. Once per game, you could remove a dice from your fate dice pool, and you can get a reduction on that stratagem. So basically, what this is it's free CP. So this detachment gives you 6 free CP you can use on these stratagems, which is really powerful. So number 1 is Presentiment of Dread, 2 is Forewarned, 3 is Unshrouded Truth, 4 is Fate Inescapable, 5 is Vicious Fury, and 6 is Psychic Shield. We will talk about these in detail in just a second. As for the enhancements, you have the Lucid Eye, which is basically only for Psyker models only. You'll notice that all of these enhancements are only for Azerani Psykers, so you can't give them to Autarchs and things. So in your command phase, you can add 1 or subtract 1 from the value of 1 fate dice in your fate dice pool. This does not revert back to their original number. This is just a permanent change that you can have in your fate dice pool. So basically what you do is in your command phase, you can add 1 to 1 dice or subtract 1 from 1 dice, and that's your new value, right? So that helps you if you roll really low or you roll a bunch of duplicates. This will help you get a better variety of stratagems that you might need throughout the battle. I do like this a lot. I like this, and I think it probably is an auto include for most lists. It is a little bit expensive, but in my honest opinion, it's worth taking because of that fact that it just helps you get better rolls and more consistency with your strategy. And that way, even if you Yahtzee 5 1s right off the bat, you can at least change some of those later in the game. But also, by the way, there's nothing wrong with a 1. I think Presentiment of Dread is a good strategy. You just probably don't want 5 of it, right? The next one is Runes of Warding. And this is really good too, but it's essentially Ozerani Psyker model only. Models in the Bearer's unit have a Feel No Pain 4 plus against mortal wounds, psychic attacks, and critical wounds caused by attacks with a devastating ability. Now, I thought initially this was a really good one and that it was going to become an auto include staple in my list. However, I have learned that it is a bit of a luxury. And when it really comes down to it in list building, it is between Runes of Warding and Lucid Eye. And 9 times out of 10, you're going to want Lucid Eye. Unless you're, teching into a certain matchup that has a lot of devastating wounds in it or mortal wounds, you're going to want Lucid Eye 9 times out of 10. So when it comes down to it, I think Runes of Warding is a great enhancement. Unfortunately, it just doesn't quite fit in to the list because you need to make room for Stone of Eldritch Fury gives a Psyker model plus 12 to the range of their psychic weapons equipped by the bearer. This is actually really good. Unfortunately, it's again one of those luxuries, right? You're only going to probably put this on a warlock, singleton warlock, if you have the points for it. No, that seems wild to some of you guys. But you can, in fact, put it on a singleton warlock. By the way, singleton warlocks are characters. You can put it on a singleton warlock on foot, not on a jet bike, because the jet bike ones, the sky runners, are not characters anymore. You can put it on foot, and it'll get a 24-inch destructor, which can be very good if you're nearby other psychers. So that's interesting. It is 15 points, but you're basically paying 60 points for a 24-inch Overwatch, and you also get Overwatch with the Singing Spear. It's probably not going to do anything, but hey, you might roll that 6, right? I think it's kind of funny. It's kind of like a meme almost. And I think in some matchups, it could actually be really good against opponents that have like really, like other Eldar, right? I think against other Eldar, it can be good. But I don't know. It just seems kind of like a luxury. I don't have it on my Warlocks. I think it's funny though. And I think I kind of want to try it one of these days. But, it's not that good. Probably not going to. The Torque of Moray Hague is really good. You put it on an Azerani Psyker model once per turn when your opponent targets a unit from their army within 12 inches of the bearer. Stratagem, bearer can use this enhancement. If it does, increase the CP cost of that usage of the stratagem by 1 CP. So that's really powerful because essentially what that means is that an enemy unit within 12 that tries to use the stratagem, you can vect them once per turn. So that's awesome. Now, the problem with this again, and I think it's mainly just the way the army's set up, is that you're always going to want to have the Lucid Eye in one of your Guardian Death Star units. And Eldrad can't take enhancements, and you're not going to have your solo warlocks also included within your Guardian Death Star units. So where does the Torque of Morag Hague go, right? Where do you put it? So I've found a really clever way to basically sneak this enhancement into the list. And I mean, maybe I'm tooting my own horn a little bit here, but I haven't seen anybody talk about this. And I think it's a really good tech into a lot of armies that love to target their units with stratagems. And you have a combination of stratagems yourself that will allow a singleton warlock model, a single warlock on foot, to get into a position to not only use the Torque of Morag Hague to increase the CP cost of strats for your enemy units, but also use one other stratagem that can deal some damage as well. And all for a 60-point package that will probably always make its points up within the turn. And we'll talk about that later on in the video as well. All right, so let's talk about stratagems. So there are 6 in total, of course, and they're all good. The Presentiment of Dread is in your command phase, target a Zuriani Psyker model from your army and select an enemy unit visible to and within 18 of it. The enemy unit takes a battle shock test at -1 leadership. So this is really powerful. I was talking about that singleton warlock that you can kind of move around the battlefield, right? With another stratagem that we'll talk about in just a second. But essentially, what this means is your opponent might not be able to score primary victory points on something. You can deep strike, or not deep strike, sorry. You can use a stratagem on your singleton warlock, get him in the enemy backfield, use this on an enemy unit, and sometimes, if the enemy unit's leadership is low enough, there'll be about a 50% chance that they just won't score primary victory points. So you can deny a lot of primary victory points from your opponent using this stratagem. I think it's brilliant. I think a lot of people think it sucks, but I've used it many times. And in every one of my games, I've at least denied 5 victory points from my opponent, if not more. I think the most victory points I've been able to deny is 10 because my opponent failed 2 battle shocks with one unit 2 turns in a row. That was really funny. Probably won't happen a lot of times, but yeah, I mean, it can happen. Forewarned is the next one. You select an Azerani infantry unit from your army, excluding Wraith units, of course, within 9 inches of a Psyker model in your army. In the fight phase, your unit is at -1 to hit and wound for the remainder of that phase. That's really powerful. It's a really strong stratagem against combat. It's really good, especially when you're, kind of in a big Guardian blob. If your Guardian blob gets charged, it makes them really durable. If Striking Scorpions or Howling Banshees get charged, makes them a little more durable. Of course, Howling Banshees have fights first, but your opponent gets past the fights first and still gets to attack with models. -1 to hit, -1 to wound, 4+ invul save makes Banshees tough. So that's also very effective as well. So Forewarned is really good on a number of units. It's not going to be always used, but it's definitely a good defense against combat. Now, the next one is Unshrouded Truth. Please excuse my extra E on the end. I guess that's a French pronunciation on Shrouded, perhaps. No, I just misspelled it, so ignore it. So, anyway, the stratagem is select an Ozerani infantry unit from your army, excluding Wraiths, within 9 inches of the Ozerani Psyker model that is not yet moved. Remove that unit from the battlefield and set it up again anywhere outside of 9 inches from enemy models. Now, the cool thing about this is it says within 9 inches of an Ozerani Psyker model that is not yet moved. That means that this can be targeted on an Ozerani Psyker model itself. So you can target something like a Singleton Warlock with it, move that unit wherever you want on the battlefield. 32 a single 32 millimeter base is actually very easy to fit in places your opponent will not expect within 9 inches. So it's going to be very hard to screen this out. You can also place it in, positions where they don't have line of sight on you, so they can't overwatch you. Or you could just simply, if that's impossible, you can just simply put it within 9 of an enemy unit that you know is going to use like stratagems, or maybe he's going to move through that area, and then you could say no overwatch on the warlock, and that's it. Your opponent can't really do anything about it, right? So Unshrouded Truth is another way also to, teleport bigger units as well. In the early game, you really want to use this to teleport your smaller units around the battlefield, make it hard for your opponent to engage you. And then later in the game, you want to dunk on them with huge units of Guardians that are packed with flamers and heavy weapons. Fate Inescapable is our next one. Select an Azerani infantry unit from your army, of course, excluding Wraiths, with Psyker model that is not yet shot. That unit's weapons gain ignores cover and -1 AP on. This is very good. First of all, this is good on the big Guardian Death Stars because their weapons do not ignore cover. They're flamers, despite, popular opinion. Their destructors do not ignore cover. So having ignores cover and AP minus, an additional -1 on critical wounds is very good. So I really do enjoy Fate Inescapable on a big unit of Guardians. It makes them harder. And it also helps other units as well. Fate Inescapable is great on units like Dire Avengers and Fire Dragons, stuff like that. Basically, anything that wants to ignore. Ish's Fury is also one of my favorites. It's very troll. It's very good at killing those like really annoying solo lone op characters as well. So Ish's Fury is you select an enemy unit that just moved within 9 inches of an Azerani Psyker model, and moved means fallback move, normal move, or advance. It's in the movement phase that you're going to use this, opponent's movement phase. So basically, when this happens, you roll 66 against that enemy unit, and for each roll of a 3+, it suffers 1 mortal wound. This is a better grenades for models that move within 9 inches of a Psyker model, and it's basically guaranteed in a lot of cases, right? Like, if you set up your Singleton Warlock within, just outside of 9 inches of an enemy model, if they move within 9 inches of your Warlock, they're going to suffer mortal wounds, right? So it's going to be very hard for solo characters or smaller units to be able to deal with it. I really like this particularly against things like the solitaire. So if your opponent's running Harlequins, right? Or, because there's going to, by the way, there's going to be a lot of players playing Eldar and they're going to have lone ops, right? It's good for Death Jester. If Death Jester wants to move, he's going to be killed. If Solitaire wants to move, it's going to be killed. Harlequin units are going to take 4 casualties, right? So this can actually do a ton of damage. And yeah, it's just wild how good this stratagem is. You definitely want to use it multiple times a game. But yeah, it's really anytime you can deal mortals, by the way, to enemy units for a relatively low CP cost, it's a very good strat. Psychic Shield is the last one. You select an Alzarani infantry unit from your army, excluding raids within Psyker model. Till the end of the phase, your unit cannot be targeted by ranges outside of 18, so it gives you an 18-inch lone op. This is really good to help your Guardian unit survive, especially against things like indirect fire. Now, the thing about indirect fire is it's not that effective. Like Guard indirect fire, by the way, not as good as it was before. It did get nerfed severely. So even so though, right? Like things like mortars can do okay damage against guardians. I think 3 units full of full mortars does about 7 wounds on average to squad of guardians. And that's okay. It's just not great, right? So basically what can happen here is you can just psychic shield, right? So your opponent's like, "Oh, I'm going to fire a bunch of mortars at your guardian units." They're like, "No, psychic shield." And that's it. Your opponent can't do anything after that. Your opponent just has to accept it, essentially. And they're going to have to shoot at something else. And a good Seer Council list will not have a better target, usually. It's going to have strong targets that are pretty much impossible to shoot at. And you can always use reserves to your advantage. Remember, just because you're in reserve, that doesn't mean anything bad. It just means you come in on the board turn 2 on your own board edge. And then in the next turn, you could use Unshrouded Truth perhaps to teleport it somewhere else. Right? Because you have that stratagem, mobility is not really that much. So if you're going against somebody who's running like triple basilisk, triple mortars, triple field like all this BS indirect fire, stuff, which by the way, they're probably not going to win the game with all that, but it's really annoying, right? Then you could put a lot of your stuff in reserve and you can simply teleport your units where they. I think a main problem with indirect fire list nowadays is it doesn't have a lot of power and it really lacks a lot of punch. It's good against Eldar stuff, but with all the mobility we have now, it's going to be really hard for them to actually be able to keep all of their indirect fire stuff alive for the whole. So they may get 1 or 2 turns, and then our units are going to close in and just wipe them all out. Mortar teams are really fragile. A single unit of Shroud Runners can just gun down mortar teams like no other. You use Unshrouded Truth to teleport units behind enemy backfields and just absolutely. So really, it's just not a real good strategy anymore to run a list like that. But anyway, yeah, Psychic Shield extremely useful and makes it extremely hard for opponents to engage models in a way that favors them. All right, so what are the best units in the detachment and why? So Guardian Defenders and Storm Guardians have a solid mix of weapons. Storm Guardians can take Flamers and Fusions, and Guardian Defenders can take a Bright Lance, and can include Warlock Conclaves and Farseers to buff their durability and allow for the target. So, being in a unit that already has a Psyker in it means that these units can just automatically be targeted by stratagems, right? So they can teleport without having to be within range of another Psyker because they already have a Psyker in the unit, which is really strong. And Guardians become really good in this detachment with all the buffs and synergy strategy. Warlocks and Warlock Conclaves, of course, can make Guardian units stronger or act as solo operatives who can form secondaries and fit in tight spaces, and also just be really annoying with Ish's Fury, right? Like putting a Warlock in a corner of a ruin so that your opponent can't see, and then just basically daring your opponent to come forward. Yeah, take, D6, or not D6, but it's, basically on average 4 mortal wounds. So it's like, yeah, just come forward and take 4 mortals. That's fine. Right? I mean, it's really insane how good that is. Farseers, and of course, Eldrad is good for Guide and Doom and CP generation in the case of Eldrad. Guide is really good with things like Wraith Lords, we'll talk about in a second. And Doom is really good for helping your Guardian units hit much. Wraith Lords are good due to the abundance of Psychers in the list. You never have to worry about being in range of one, really, especially with Unshrouded Truth, being able to teleport Psyker near a Wraith Lord in times where Wraith Lords need that +1 hit, and also +1 Ballista skill that they'll get. And you really do need anti-vehicle and monster in this list, and Wraith Lords give you that. And they also give you something tough that can be on an objective and not immediate. That is strong. Warwalkers, for their ability to reduce enemy armor saves, are good. And there's 2 Bright Lances, right? So it's more armor penetration, and on top of it, they're very mobile. Having the ability to scout does help them. They're not as durable as before, so you can't use them in quite the same way as before. You're kind of putting them out in the open, and they're okay to survive in the open. But they can come down a flank, they can really work the flank, and they can provide good firing lanes for army to get a lot of extra damage. Crowd runners, for their ability to remove the benefit of cover, is also really good. They're also very tough with stealth, toughness 4, and 5-up invul against range attacks and 3 wounds apiece. They're kind of sneaky tough. They're good at scoring objectives, things like sabotage and stuff. They can survive long enough typically to that objective. Not that you'll always want to do it with them, but they do also remove cover. Scatter lasers are much better now as well with sustained hits. So they're hitting a lot more hard against light infantry and stuff. So they're just all around a good unit for this list. Autarchs also pass out even more free stratagems and love being able to teleport around. You can put an Autarch in a Scorpion squad or a Banshee squad, and both of those are very good in this list. I don't run Banshees in my list. I do run Scorpions. However, I do think both units are very good with in this particular build. Okay, so what is the general strategy, strengths, and weaknesses of the? So here's the general strategy that you want into when. So first of all, baiting opponents into engaging with your trading pieces, playing conservatively in the first few turns, and then using Unshrouded Truth and Psychic Shield to protect your units and misdirect. That's how you want to play the list in the very beginning, right? Bait your opponents out so they do have to engage you, but challenge them by, kind of pre-measuring correctly and stuff like that, using things like Scout, Fire and Fade, or not Fire and Fade, excuse me, Fade Away, and also Psychic Shield and Unshrouded Truth to kind of move units out of harm's way in the beginning, and maybe trade up with the certain units as well, or perhaps even just make it very hard for deal any counter damage. In the mid game and late game, you do want to exploit the holes you've made in your opponent's side of the board and set up pockets of control that enemy units will have trouble pushing through. And again, things like your Guardian defenders or Storm Guardians pushing and teleporting into a position on the battlefield where if your opponent moves forward, they can get overwatched, they can get hit with Fury, and there's just a lot of things your opponent has to get through to actually capture. That is the strength of the army. The strengths of the army are they have tons of mobility and denial, which we've already talked about, being able to teleport anywhere on the battlefield or just overwatch with insane numbers is always really strong. They have massive stratagem discounts as well, which opens up greater secondary play. You can discard more secondary objectives, no problem. And you can carry out more offensive strats. So, in addition to your detachment strats, having more CP to use things like grenades and tank shock is very useful as well. They have strong late game power also due to their strong Death Star options that can act as CP dumps. I mean, you could just dump a bunch of CP into a Guardian unit. You can throw a grenade. You can use, it's just Fury. You can use Fate Inescapable, right? To ignore cover and get AP -1 on critical wounds, right? You could just make the damage of the unit very extreme. Their weaknesses, however, are that their strats don't support a lot of Mekdar play. This isn't a Mekdar list. This is more of a Footdar style. So, there's basically no play with vehicles at all. There's no getting back into transports. There's no stratagem that targets vehicles. There's absolutely no support for vehicles except for on the data sheets themselves. So Zerman, of course, the old ass man, and 5 Dire Avengers are great in a Falcon. They're great in a Falcon, guys, but there's just not a lot of support outside of that. And they can be weak to melee without the right supporting unit. So if you don't have something that fights first, or you don't have something that's overwatching, or something along those lines, they can be weak to melee armies. So things like Blood Angels, things like, Slaaneshi demons, you're going to want to position your models correctly so you suffer a horrible fate. All right, so here's the list I've been running. Now, I don't think this is a perfect list, but I think it's pretty close. I'm kind of getting to that point where I'm dialing it in, and I think I'm almost there. I am missing a little bit of something. I don't know what it is yet. Maybe you guys in the comments can let me know, but I think I'm almost there. So I got Eldrad. Again, Eldrad's great. He's an auto include. I know some people in the competitive scene are like, Eldrad sucks. He doesn't. He's amazing. He's great in this detachment. He's great in a lot of detachments. Doom is really good. Mind War's okay. I mean, it's not, Mind War's not the best, but you take him for Doom, you take him for CP generation, and he's also decent in combat with Stormguard. You have a Farseer with the Singing Spear and Lucid Eye, 100 points. So, quite expensive for a Farseer, but again, that Lucid Eye is really good. He's with the Guardian Defenders. You have an Autarch with a Dragon Fusion Gun and Starglaive. 75 points makes these Striking Scorpions better. You have a Zerman for 135 because he's just... Honestly, a Zerman's probably an auto-include in almost every detachment until he gets nerfed. You have a Warlock with a Singing Spear for 45 points, just a singleton. You have a Warlock with a Singing Spear and Torque of Morin Hague for 65 points. Again, a really cheap unit that just absolutely dominates in certain situations. And for Battle Line, we have 2 units of Guardians, Guardian Defenders with the Bright Lance, and Storm Guardians with all the special weapons of 2 Flamers, 2 Fusion Guns, 2 Power Swords, and Serpent's Platform. As far as our other data sheets, you have 2 units of Warlock Conclaves. They're going to be max 4-man units of Conclaves with Singing Spears. You're going to have 5 Dire Avengers. The Exarch has dual catapults. They're going to obviously German. You have 5 Fire Dragons. The Exarch has the Dragon Fusion Gun. I like this option a little bit better because you can rapid ingress this unit, and the Dragon Fusion Gun has Melta 6. So it's doing a lot more damage when it does hit, and you're getting full rerolls to hit, to wound, and on damage with this unit. So potentially, what you can do is the Exarch can split fire into another vehicle. So you can come on in with rapid ingress, you could advance and get within range of 2 tanks. Become immune to Overwatch. You could use the token to... I almost laugh when I say this, but you can use the token to guarantee that your Exarch can wound the target, and then you're re-rolling your damage roll. So, on average dice, you could probably kill about 2 things with this squad. You can kill 1 thing with the Fire Dragons, and you can kill 1 thing with the Exarch. And you can grenade on top of that. And remember what I said about more stratagems in this detachment. So, Fire Dragons are an excellent choice, I think. And in my first game that I played with this list, I actually ran 2 Warwalkers instead of the Fire Dragons. And the second Warwalker, I just felt like it was a waste. So having the Fire Dragons instead of the Warwalker was a good choice. You have a Falcon with a Bright Lance and Shuriken Cannon, which, obviously has the Fire Dragons in it, but potentially can have the Striking Scorpions with the Autarch. You have 3 Wraith Lords with 2 Bright Lances apiece, 2 Flamers, and Ghost Claves. They're going to be the heavy hitters and kind of tanks of the army. They're going to be able to survive a decent amount of damage. And really what they do best is they bring enemy units out to play. Right? Your opponent has to bring out some heavy hitters to be able to deal with Wraith Lords. And at that point, you have a lot of stuff in the army that can take them out. We have a Shadow Weaver, 75 points. That's going to kind of do some little bit of chip damage along the course of the game with the Guardian Defender unit, and be able to just tag units with a great ability to force them to take essentially dangerous terrain checks. If they roll a 1, they suffer a mortal wound. You have 3 Shroud Runners with the Scout and their ability to capture objectives and stuff like that, and screen and, shoot light infantry. just a really well-rounded unit that works right in this list because of cover. We have the Striking Scorpions, of course, which are our infiltration unit, which we do need something along those lines so we just don't get dogpiled on turn one. And we have a Warwalker with two Bright Lances. I have never found that the Bright Lances have failed me yet. Usually I hit at least once with them and I can proc my ability. If I can't hit with them at least one time, with guide and everything, then I'm just rolling really unlucky and I'm just going to have to chalk that up to bad luck and maybe do a command reroll, right? So the other thing about the Warwalker is some people are considering taking it with other weapons because of its ability, but it's a little bit too expensive for that, guys. It's still 90 points, which makes it really expensive to run with anything but bright. So, shaving 15 points off the cost, I don't think was quite enough. I think this thing should honestly be cheaper, but seeing as it has almost no support in other detachments, but it is a good piece to have in a list because, Scout is really good. And also, just having something that can debuff enemy units is always needed. However, again, like I said, I might switch them out for something else later on the line. I think Dark Reapers are a good choice for replacement. And I think a couple of other units, Warp Spiders or Swooping Hawks could be good choices as well. I just really have to kind of take my time and see if that extra AP is really doing the work. And oftentimes, I have to say, it does do good work inside Wraithlord. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to dive into a tabletop simulator example. I'm going to show you how to set up the army generally, I think on train layout number 3 or 4. And then I'm going to go ahead and kind of show you some tricks that you can do on setting up your units and where to position your units and things. So, of course, we will dive into that, and I will meet you in Tabletop Simulator. Alrighty, everybody. So, welcome to the Tabletop Simulator breakdown of how to deploy the Seer Council detachment and how to maneuver them on the back. I am going to also show you some of the tips and tricks to running this army effectively. So, truth be told, obviously, as you guys know, Codex just came out. I've run this army probably about 3 times already, and it's quickly become my favorite because of the options that exist for it and the different things you can do with this army are just absolutely insane. It may not have the raw power of something like Aspect Host, and it may not have the move, shoot, move capabilities of War Host, but I'm telling you guys right now, it's probably one of the most versatile detachments in the. It can do almost anything do as long as you deploy correctly and are very careful. Which, playing Eldar for 20 plus years will do that. And it will happen for you guys as well as you get more reps in with your units. So, what's in the list? Well, this is what it looks like. Now, it looks really small. That's the first thing. But it is packed with power. A lot of these units are really hard to engage, and we're going to make it even harder by deploying smartly, correctly, and we're also going to make it more smart stratagems and ability. So, just going over it once more, we have Eldrad with Storm Guardians. I believe he's best with Storm Guardians just because this is a more aggressive unit when it needs to be. Has a lot of flamers. Have Doom with you, which lasts, the full round. You can Doom a target, shoot it a lot, and then, of course, if they try to move afterward, you can Overwatch them and finish them off. Still in. We do have a Zerman and 5 Dire Avengers with a Falcon because this combo is just so mean. It's good in every single detachment. It's one of those, S tier combinations that will do you well in pretty much any detachment. This is also good for Seer Council because if the Falcon, for whatever reason, gets destroyed, you can pick this unit up with the Zerman and 5 Dire Avengers and kind of move it around the battlefield as you wish with. Also, they do like ignores cover, and they do like having the ability to crit on 6s, having AP, an additional AP minus. That's not a bad. We do have a unit of 5 Scorpions with an Autarch. Now, I really did consider not running an Autarch I have to say, I thought about running just an extra squad of Scorps. You can do either one. If you want to run the Autarch with them, that's fine. If you want to run just an extra squad of Scorps, that's okay also. I just found that running the Autarch with them increases their ability to survive because they get that free stratagem. So being able to unshrouded truth to the other side of the battlefield for free, or being able to do something like that. And by the way, you're pretty much always with smart deployment going to be within 12 inches of these guys after their scout move. So basically how it works is, you use your scout move to, move to a safer position. And then in your first turn, if you don't have any good targets to charge, you can save this unit for later by just unshrouded truth. And there's a couple of other cool little tricks and stuff you can do as well with the Falcon. So if, for example, Azurman and the boys don't really need rerolls to wound, then you can, like, okay, for example, right, anti-infantry 3 points. What are the maybe you don't need to kill 7 Terminators. Maybe you're just going after lighter targets. You don't need to use as many feet right away. Well, he probably doesn't need rerolls wounds right away, right? So you could throw this unit in the Falcon and it can be an aggressive choice. And of course, what you would do is you would simply use Unshrouded Truth, move these guys into range of the Falcon so they can embark, and then they would embark as normal. So, and that's in the movement phase. Now, that's a little bit more advanced, and I think sometimes it's not needed. Like, for example, it didn't come up in any of my games, but I was actively thinking about using it sometimes because I just thought it was a cool little trick, but it never really came up. It's one of those things that's good in theory, but in practice, it may only come up once in every 5 games. Now, what this unit is, though, is it's really sticky. It's really hard to get rid of with the Autarch. When it's just by itself, you really don't feel like using any stratagems on it to protect this unit. It's only 75 points, pretty expendable. But with the Autarch, you do feel the need to, maybe Unshrouded Truth, maybe Psychic Shield, right? Stuff like that. And also, by the way, this unit, because other units like to charge into it and fight it in combat, you could easily just put -1 to hit, -1 to wound on it. And it becomes pretty hard to deal with in close combat. Because Scorpions do have decent armor, decent invul save, and you have an Autarch with you who's who's actually pretty good in combat as well. So there is that. Also gives the unit a better fadeaway ability, allows you to reroll advance rolls, I believe, as well. So yeah, pretty good combo, honestly. And I thought this was just more value than having 2 units of Scorpions by themselves. We also have a Warwalker to put the armor debuff on enemy units. Very useful when you have things like Wraith Lords with Bright Lances. Bright Lances are good, don't get me wrong, but I think they do suffer from a little bit of lack of AP, which the Warwalker helps with. We have 3 Shroud Runners, which can remove cover. Another great thing. I know that we do have the removes cover with the Stratagem. However, these guys being able to allow a Falcon or Wraith Lords to benefit from that as well is really good. We have 5 Fire Dragons. I like to do a couple things with these. I have run them in reserve a couple times when I knew my opponent might leave an opening for them. And I've basically put them in for rapid ingress, which is a really useful way of just absolutely wrecking a vehicle if your opponent is not. So, unit of 5 in reserve, or just deployed on the board. Unshrouded Truth is a way to bring them closer, but they won't be within melter range if you do so. So you have to be careful with them, I think. I think the best way really to run these guys is in reserve. We also have a unit of Guardian Defenders with their Warlock Conclave Bodyguard and the Shadow Weaver. This is the Guardian Death Star I was talking about. And basically, this unit's job is to play conservatively, buff enemy, or, debuff enemy units, give your whole army bonuses against them as they cross the midboard and start to try to engage you, which is going to be very difficult with this list. And your opponent has to move to engage you. That's the thing. That's the beauty of this list, is that a lot of units in your opponent's army are just not going to be able to engage in traditional ways. So they're going to need to get closer, and you have basically the means to counterattack very hard. So we have this unit here. Guide is great with Wraith Lords. Allows them to hit on a 2+. against an enemy vehicle or monster. And of course, they are rerolling ones to hit and wound against vehicles and monsters as well. That is if your opponent army. Then we have, as kind of a finishing off, we have two Singleton Warlocks. One has the Torque of Morag Hague, and I probably should have mentioned also the Farseer here has the Lucid Eye. Makes it much easier for you to get the right stratagems that you need. And basically, you know, I explained earlier in the video how it works, but just a quick reminder. The Lucid Eye changes aren't just for one turn. You change the stratagem number permanently. So if you roll a bunch of ones and twos and get really unlucky in the beginning of the game, over the course of the game, this Lucid Eye can change several of those into stratagems that are a little bit better for you, which is good. Now, the Torque of Morag Hague, this may seem like a waste of points. A lot of people are going to look at this and say, this is a troll warlock, right? It's super troll. Why would you ever do this? Well, actually, so get this, right? So it's not exactly as powerful as something like maybe, you know, the Calidus Assassin or something like that. I mean, obviously the Warlock for 65 points, you can put that up against a Calidus Assassin, and it's a joke, right? The Calidus is better in almost every way. A little more points, but it's better in almost every way. Now, the advantage to the Warlock, though, guys, is twofold. First of all, it's more expendable. Second of all, there are ways that you can absolutely cheese your opponent with this. If they bring a huge Death Star against you, like let's say they bring a huge unit of Canoptic Wraiths, right? Maybe you're facing up against Necrons, or maybe you're facing up against something like IG, where they have a huge Rogel Dorn that is just ready and raring to go, right? And you don't have you don't have 10 Fire Dragons and Fuegan in this list, right? So what do? That's the question. Well, most of the survivability from the Rogel Dorn comes from stratagems. A couple in particular. First of all, smoke, right? Smoke on pretty much any guard vehicle is going to help them survive way better. -1 to hit and cover. We can get rid of the cover, but that -1 to hit is going to be really hard to overcome, right? Wraith Lords lose a lot of their power against -1 to hit. So what we could do instead, and so do Fire Dragons, right? Hitting on 4 sucks with Fire. But what we could do is we could just put this Warlock within 9 inches of the Rogel Dorn. Now, your opponent can Overwatch, but we're going to declare a battle focus maneuver, right, to prevent that. Now, we can't do that multiple times. So basically with this army, it's all about balancing your stratagem and battle focus use. So we're going to put this guy within 9 inches. Sometimes you can get lucky and your opponent will leave a spot in a ruin where they don't have line of sight to this little guy. And the Torque of Morag Hague can just kind of be used, and you can kind of prevent Overwatch with it. Now, the thing about the Torque of Morag Hague that you have to remember, though, guys, is it is 20 points. It does make them a lot more expensive, and you have to be careful because the ability itself is a little bit different. So the cool thing is you don't have to be within line of sight. Okay, you can hide and still use it within 12 inches. So that means that you have a little bit of room to maneuver and stuff like that. And in my games, I found that I was actually able to hide this guy really well. And if you're able to hide him and your opponent can't Overwatch, then you don't need to spend the battle focus token. But anyway, the point of this is that it increases the stratagem cost of something by 1. So if your opponent wants to use, for example, smoke, it's going to be 2 CP. Now, a lot of guard players are not using Lord Solar anymore. Some are because they have the model, they love him, they love the CP generation, but he's really expensive now, and a lot of guard players are kind of going away from that. So being able to say, yeah, actually that's 2 CP now, is going to throw your opponent off a little bit, right? Now, the other thing is, the other Warlock is just an action monkey. 45 points, you can teleport him anywhere you want, and he's just there to also provide a little bit of Isha's Fury, right? He's a great Isha's Fury target. So essentially, like I said before, Isha's Fury is that stratagem that, you roll 66, and for every 3 up, enemy unit suffers a mortal wound. Well, you can do the same thing with this guy. You just kind of throw him out there. You throw him into a ruin behind line of sight or something like that, and when an enemy unit moves within 9 inches, just blast him with that stratagem. It's really, and it's a, honestly, guys, it makes up its points every time. I've never had a game where this guy didn't make up its points or do something hilarious. He's really good at stopping characters from moving. I put this guy next to a Calidus Assassin, actually, believe it or not. And I did just pay the CP for, I actually had a discount on it. So I only still paid 1 CP for it. And my opponent just auto died. It was that simple. My opponent was like, well, you're going to have to pay an extra CP for it. And I was like, all right, I'll pay the CP. Rolled my 66, got, actually 5 of them, and Calidus Assassin died. Easy kill, right? 45-point unit kills kills a 100-point unit. Fantastic. And I'm telling you guys, I didn't think, Warlocks on Foot were that good until I started playing this list. So that's the list. We have a Shadow Weaver in here as well for some indirect fire. But basically, let me show you guys kind of how we're going to deploy this thing here. So this is how I would deploy. This is a sweeping engagement. This is on train layout, I want to say 3 or 4. And essentially what I would do is I would deploy kind of like this. I would deploy on 2 sides of the battlefield, and I'd have something in the center. I always keep a Warlock in a ruin in a corner near my striking Scorpions, and I'll show you, I'll kind of tell you the reason why in just a second. So we'll start off with the Warwalker. Why are we deploying the Warwalker way over in the... Well, because the Warwalker has Scout, right? So on turn 1, if your opponent gets the first turn and you think they have a fast enough unit to move out into this area and get a line on the Warwalker, what you can do is you can just simply either move back here, or if your opponent doesn't have anything fast that can get line of sight, you can actually move your Warlock just right up here behind this. This is line of sight blocking terrain. The base is small enough to fit behind, and then look at these angles, guys. Look at these beautiful angles for next turn. Wow, right? I can come over here, I can shoot here, I can come here, I can shoot anything over here if my opponent's trying to push the side of the battlefield. If my opponent sits in the back and does nothing, I could go, okay, I'm going to move 10 inches up, right? And I'm going to start preparing. I'm going to move right here behind this one. I'm going to start preparing to, kind of fire into my opponent's backfield. So there's a lot of options the Warwalker can do on this. You could put him on this flank, but I just feel like this is going to be a little bit more heavily guarded. Your opponent is going to love to put tanks back here because this is a very safe spot. Tanks. So I just don't feel like the Warwalker fits in that spot. Falcon is right here with the Dire Vendors. This is just so that you can kind of move it into this area to, kind of just destroy whatever comes in. You could also, depending on where your opponent moves the models, you could either move it up the flank along here with the Warwalker, or you could simply just move it this way, move it over here behind this, and then you can kind of threaten anything in the middle. If your opponent's moving a lot of units to the middle, that's what you want to do. Storm Guardians are back here. They're going to sticky this objective back here because that's really, we don't want to like keep anything on this back objective typically until, unless we need to, right? Unless your opponent has a lot of deep strikers. So we sticky the objective, and that gives us the option of taking this unit here and kind of, with Unshrouded Truth, repositioning it anywhere we want on the battlefield. It's also a good place for Doom, because again, if anything moves into this area, you can come out with this unit, Doom a target, kill it, Flamers. You have a ton of Flamers in here. You have 4 Warlocks. You have Eldrad, who has Mind War. And then, of course, you have 2 Flamers and 2 Fusion Guns. There's a ton of firepower in here. This unit has a literal bag of napalm that they can just come out and kind of do that. And then if your opponent shoots them, they can either fade back, or if they're far enough away, you can use Psychic Shield. Okay, now, I wanted to tell you guys about the strategy with the Autarch, because I think this is important to note. We are used to using Scorpions in a very tradey way. We want to use them to trade. We want to use them to, kind of deny infiltration. We want to use them to score objectives. Well, in this list, believe it or not, the Scorpion unit doesn't really want to do that. I have these guys kind of equipped as a little package of doom, a little package of death dealing. So essentially, the Autarch, by the way, hits super hard now. These Scorpions can hit really hard, and they're kind of sticky in combat because of the stratagem that allows them to, forewarned, by the way, it's called, to give them -1 to hit, -1 to wound. That's fantastic. The Autarch, of course, also gives them a free strat. So they can get that for free whenever they, are within range of a Psyker, which again, you should always be within 12. That's why I kind of put this Warlock here. Now, the Warlock's goal here is twofold. So this is actually the one with the Torque of Moray. Now, this is actually quite hilarious. So you put it right here, put it within 12 of this unit. Now, your opponent has a couple of choices how they engage this unit. If they want to assault this unit, then, and they have like Blood Angels. So I went up against a Blood Angels player, my buddy, with this list. And one of the things he wanted to do early in the game, the first thing he asked me was, does this thing have fights first? Did these have fights first? I said, no, they don't. Because the Autarch lost that ability. I said, okay, perfect. So I'm going to charge him, right? And we had about a 10-minute discussion on why, if he charged these guys, he was probably going to die a horrible death. I said, well, I can at least. Said, you probably won't even get into combat. Basically, here's how it works. He had a squad of Death Company set up in here. Death Company are pretty mean. They're nasty models. They will kill every last model in here. So essentially, he set these guys up. I infiltrated these guys later because, believe it or not, he had no infiltrators in his list. He just didn't bother me, which is fine. I don't think Blood Angels need it with all the speed they have, but, personally, I need at least one. So he brought it here. He set up his Death Company behind this wall. Death Company, and the detachment he was going with, he actually had advance in charge. So he could have advanced in charge. 12 inches from the wall to out here, right? Right about there. That gives him an easy 6-inch charge. Maybe even less, right? Now, what I did, I had two options myself. Also, we had a ball predator back here. So basically, I had two options. I could scout. I could make my scout move 7 inches back. Or, if I got first turn, I could go after him and hopefully kill his Death Company. That was the goal. Because if I can actually get to him here, right, I don't have 12 inches. I only have a 9-inch move. Plus 2 inches. But I could probably make a 7-inch. That's what I thought. All I need to do is get within base of the wall, right? Now, as it turned out, I did not get the first turn in this game, but I had a backup plan. So what I did was I moved my squad of Scorpions back a little. Moved them right in the middle, right here. And my opponent's looking at me and he says, well, if I get at least a 4-inch advance, I can still get you, right? Because I can go 16 inches and I can still get you easy charge. And I said, yeah, absolutely, you can do that. However, you are going to be taking a possible 66 mortal wounds with, of course, the Warlock here. He was like, well, don't you need line of sight for that? And I said, absolutely not. You do not need line of sight for Ish's Fury. It just happens. So if my opponent goes here, I measure out my 9 inches, and guess what? I'm right there. Right? That's not exactly what it is. Okay. I'm in the corner. 9 inches, so I have range on Ish's Fury, right? So that's going to be most likely 2 Death Company dead, but maybe just 1.5. That's actually still enough, though, right? That's still enough to kind of put a hole in him. Still enough to make him fear a little bit. Now, the other thing is no stratagems. Because he's going first, he's generating 1 CP by going first, and I'm able to use the Torque of Morag Hague to stop him using stratagems. So what that means is, if he fails that charge, if he rolls low on that first charge, then he's just failed. He can't do it, right? If he wants to use something to rip through not only the Scorpions, but the Autarch as well, then he needs to use some CP, and he's not going to be able to do it because of the Torque Morag Hague. So he's in an awkward spot here, right? Now, I do have Shroud Runners, but they're probably not going to screen. Like, I wouldn't honestly want them to sit on that because they're a little more points. I would just move them back here. No big deal here. These guys obviously can kind of just stay there. Now, if he tries to shoot them with his unit, with some pistols, I can fade away and I can get back. So he can't shoot me either. So he has to charge into a full unit here. And yes, 4 or, 3 Death Company models can definitely still kill this unit, but they're not trading well. And they're actually, expending a bunch of time and energy coming over here to charge this unit. It's just not going to happen for him. So what he ended up doing, he thought it was just too risky. He didn't want to risk his unit on a gamble like that, like having to make a 6. First of all, having to roll at least a 4 on an advance roll, which is a 50-50, and then having to roll at least a 6 on a charge roll. He was like, I don't think I want to do it. So he just didn't do it. So my Scorpions just lived, right? And then he considered moving out here through this, kind of up here with the ball predator to shoot him, but they have stealth. So the ball predator, unfortunately for him, didn't have the ball flamer. I don't know why he didn't take it. I love the ball flamer. He says it sucks. I don't know. Any Blood Angels players out there, is the flamer worth it on the ball predator, or do you take the assault cannons? He was saying the assault cannons were what he built his model with, and he thought they were better. I think the. But even if he did do that, right? Like even if from this position moved forward his, I think ball predators at 14 inches, I could have still probably evaded line of sight because I wasn't deployed actually. So I don't think he had line of sight on me, but I think ball predators can advance and anyway, whatever. So he would have killed the Scorpions then, but again, that's a 75-point unit traded for a much more expensive model. So that's the goal with the Scorpions, right? Set up your Scorpions in a way to where your opponent can't really assault them very easily on the first turn, can't really shoot them very easily on the first turn, right? Like if he has something that has indirect fire, you have Psychic Shield, right? So there is that. If he's shooting at something more durable like the Guardians, he's not going to do much damage. Somebody, I think, mentioned, what if you go against a guard mortar list? Guys, let me just show you how crappy mortars are against -1 to wound. I'm just going to, and cover. I'm just going to show you real quick, right? So a guard mortar list, by the way, will probably have 3 units of mortars in it. And they're not going to kill that many guards. Let's say they shoot guardians. Like if they shoot fire dragons, yeah, they'll probably kill them. But that's why if you go against an army like that, you reserve these models. I would even consider reserving the Singleton Warlocks if I was going against something like that. But the mortars are just not going to do any damage to the Wraith Lords. They're not going to do any damage to the Warlock Guardians, right? Falcon, give me a break. They're not going to deal any damage to that. 6s to wound. Or excuse me, they need 5s to wound, which is still a lot. And then I'm getting a 2+, no, sorry, a 3+ save against it. And then we have, these Storm Guardians, which are also very so just check this out. So against a squad like this, we have at least 15 models. So they're going to get +3 attacks on each of them. That's going to be +9. So we're going to go 3d6. They get 3d6 attacks. So that's an average of 10. We're just going to give them 10 dice, give them 9 more attacks, right? Boom. Okay, so they're going to be hitting on 4s. There's no way they can hit farther than that, right? And then they do have to spend an order on each one. I don't know if they have enough. I think Ursula Creed can give them all take aim, but then nothing else is getting take aim, right? So let's roll it. 4+. Let's see what happens. Really good roll. That usually doesn't happen, but that's okay. Boom, right? So 13. So now they're going to need 4s to wound because we have Duke or Fortune up. Right? Excellent. Okay, perfect. 7 dice. So we're going to times this by 3. Okay? We're going to say that's the average. And by the way, that was actually a good roll. Even if we give them double, right? We're going to give them 21 armor saves. And that's going to be at a 3-up. We'll lose a lot of Guardians, but we're not losing the whole squad. Right? We get a 3-up save. Unless I roll really garbage, which could happen. But on average, these guys don't die. So a full turn of your opponent rolling really good with all the mortar squads, rolling really good, also ordering them all with take aim, hitting on fours, wounding on fours, and also you failing probably, let's see. Yeah, so I'm going to lose. I don't know why I just did. Well, anyway, I mean, I think, yeah, it was just 4 extra. So, yeah, I'm going to lose the average, which was 7. I think I don't know. Correct me in the comments if I can't remember how much I lost, but it wasn't enough to kill the unit, right? It just wasn't enough to kill the whole unit. We kill some guardians off. I have my warlocks. I have everything else. Everything's good, right? So even in the extremes, when your opponent's running a ton of indirect fire, they're not going to deal their damage, you know, enough. They're not going to deal enough damage. Now, what we can do in return is we can basically slaughter every single, one mortar squad, by the way, can die to a single Shadow Weaver platform. Like it's really not. They're not that good, right? Shadow Weavers get what is it, D6+3 now, right? 7 attacks. 7. I'm hitting on 4s, right? Excellent. I'm wounding on 2s now. 4 at, -1, which is, cover, so they just get a 5 up against this. That was actually pretty good. But yeah, I mean, even so, right? Even with a lucky guard roll, I mean, they're losing a mortar team from that. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's not as good as I thought actually in hindsight, because I forgot this thing has damage 1. But there's other things, right? You have shroud runners. Shroud runners can come up behind him, shoot him to death, stuff like that. So there's really not. I personally don't think they're that good. I just don't think so. If you're in a meta of heavy indirect fire as well, another thing you could do is, if they have a ton of mortar teams, you can just get rid of the Warwalker. I know that seems weird, but get rid of it and throw in another Shadow Weaver. Or perhaps, change this squad of Storm Guardians to Guardian Defenders. Get rid of this and then throw in another Shadow Weaver in that unit, right? And then you're eliminating probably about a mortar team a turn, right? If you have 3 Shadow Weavers, you probably can eliminate 1 mortar squad a turn, and you can win that indirect battle. And then, your opponent can't really do anything. Anyway, okay, that was a long diversion for kind of an explanation on nothing. But yeah, essentially, we're setting these guys up so that they are really hard to engage with, right? This unit back here is near the Wraith Lord. Now, the reason for this is because the Wraith Lords need line of sight on 2 firing lanes, this one and this one. The reason why is because your opponent, again, like I said, they're going to have a lot of vehicles here, and maybe even they're going to have vehicles here. Because, and you definitely want to deploy your Wraith Lords dead last. You want to know where your opponent's vehicles are, so that you can deploy your Wraith Lords here. Now, the Wraith Lords, they have 6 Bright Lances between them. It's very good. And on top of that, you have a Bright Lance from this Guardian squad, but you also have a Farseer with Guide. So what this does is it gives the Wraith Lords a 2+ to hit against a target, and they already reroll 1 to hit and wound against their selected target. Vehicles are. So if your opponent moves a vehicle up behind this ruin right here to stage, or moves it up into a place where it can shoot, like a very common position is right here. They'll move here, or they'll move right here so they can shoot through this gap. Right? Well, your Wraith Lords can cover that. Wraith Lords have movement. You just move here, right, with your Wraith Lords. Boom, boom. Line it up against the enemy vehicle. And I just want to show you guys, right? You move the Farseer up as well. You cast Guide, right? The Farseer, actually, it's at the end of the movement phase. You're going to move up 7, or in case the Farseer, you actually move this whole Guardian squad up, string them out a little bit, And the Farseer itself can move up to 9 with the speed buff. So even you could even probably advance, right, to here. And then from here, 18 inches, boom, right? You got line of sight on this vehicle right here. So, and you got range on it. Guide it, and then the Wraith Lords open. The Wraith Lords are going to get about 6 attacks. They're Brightlands. I've done this before, but I just want to kind of show you how insane this could be, right? Shroud Runners come up here, get rid of their cover. They don't have a cover, right? And like I said before, I could use the movement, the Unshrouded Truth on this Warlock, and guess where I could just put him? I could put him like right here, over here, 9 inches away from this tank, but out of line of sight. No one can shoot him from here unless they're literally right on. Probably not going to be. Right? Like there's not going to be like a squad of flamers right here, right? Like oh, just in case the Warlock comes over here. No, probably not. So you can definitely just like kind of like put them right here usually, or maybe even just like maybe even that's not even needed, right? You just kind of put them right here, here, right behind this wall, and as long as you have 12 inches, you do right. If we're saying the vehicle's coming out here to shoot, then you can eliminate their ability to use stratagems. So when we roll our dice, we're hitting on twos. All of them hit. We're wounding now on threes against most vehicles, like a Lehman Russ Commander, for something like that. We're wounding on threes, and we'll just, it just goes. So that's 5 armor saves at -3. We hit it with the Warwalker, it's going to be, additionally -1, but we're probably not going to hit it with so much at once. But even just at -3, right? They have a 5-up save, and it's like on these videos, I always roll really good for my. But even so, 2 bright lances going through is, chances are it could probably pop it if you roll. That's ridiculous. Probably shouldn't. Yeah, there we go. A 9 will do it. Right? A 9 plus 4 is going to be 13, which is, I think, exactly enough to kill a Lehman Russ battle tank. I think they do have 13 wounds. So there you go. So the luck balanced out a little bit, right, guys? So, yeah, that's insane. Oh, and we did have the Guardian Brightlands, too, that we could have. Hitting on twos and, wounding on threes is also pretty. So, yeah, 3 Wraith Lords can just go and just bang up a Lehman Russ battle tank, like, no problem. And then they're pretty hard to kill in return. Your opponent's definitely not going to be able to kill all of the Wraith Lords. Maybe they kill 1 in retaliation, but they're not going to be able to kill all 3, right? Which is great. So that's their in cover. They're tough. Their toughness 10, 10 wounds a pop. They have a 2+ armor save, which is going to carry them a little bit. That's it. That's all they really. Okay. All right. So yeah, that's kind of how you want to deploy in the beginning and kind of mess with your opponent and stuff. Now later in the game, you do want to do a couple of things with your Guardian units. Now, your Guardian units are going to be key to winning the game. So once your opponent starts moving units out, once your opponent starts dying, then you can transport your Guardians pretty much anywhere. I could pick up this unit of Guardians right in the late game after your opponent has their deep strikers come down. Like if your opponent has nothing like uppy downy or anything like that, you don't have to protect your backfield anymore. I could just pick this whole unit of Guardians up and I can move them right to my enemy's support. Right? I could move them right to the back. And my opponent can't really do anything about it unless they screen the backfield out for the game. Which again, on turns 4 and 5, your opponent's backfield is usually pretty empty. Like boards, like, by the way, your stuff's going to be dead too. Right? You're not going to have like a ton of stuff left yourself, but you're going to have these Guardian units that were kind of playing more conservatively in the beginning, and you could just kind of just dominate your opponent, right? Like this is easy line breaker, but also if your opponent doesn't have anything right here, right, you can just put them behind this objective. Turn 4, boom. And then on your turn 5, you can move up, shoot whatever's on the objective off, and then assault it and cap. Move 9 inches with this squad, right? You have 9 inches here. Move 9 inches up. You can shoot it, and then you can charge whatever's on the objective. Right? You've captured a ton of OC because you're guarding. So if your, Imperial Guard opponent has like a unit of Catachans here with like Ursula Creed and all that, like this unit right here will just absolutely wreck it and just take the objective, right? But that can happen anytime in the game with Storm Guardians because they have just more flame. Like if your opponent moves up a huge blob of Imperial Guardsmen and like sticks them on this objective right here on the right hand side, sticks them on the objective, you could just come in, and this is I absolutely this army. You just come in and just flamer them right off. Come here, flamer them off, and absolutely them, or you could just walk up to them. Often just it's absolutely. And to give you an idea of how powerful some of these flamers are, right? You're getting 4 from the warlocks. I want to show you, even with a low roll, that's a bad roll. But even with this roll, that's gonna be 12, right? So it's 12 shots, but they're getting +2 because of their ability. So +2 each. That's +8. There we go. 20. That's 20 flamer shots from the warlocks. That's enough attacks to kill every single guardsman in the unit. I'm wounding on 2s, guys. I'm wounding on 2s. And I can ignore cover with my stratagem, right? I can ignore cover, and I can get critical AP -1 on critical. So it looks like 4 are going to fail, but I'm basically going to kill 16 guards, almost 16 guards. They do get a 6-up save, which they make 1 of, so 15 guardsmen just die. That's only the warlocks that did that, by the way. Just the warlocks. We still haven't even shot the rest of the unit. We have Eldrad, we have 2d6 flamer shots from the regular storm guardians. Look what they did. Horrible. But you guys get the idea, right? I mean, it's a ton of attacks going towards a unit like that. So they're just absolute. I don't know how many people are going to run 20-man blobs anymore, but I'm telling you right now, like, unless they're Kriegsmen with the Medipack, I think the Medipack actually lost field. I think it lost it. They're just not going to survive, right? Your opponent can't put anything on an objective in the late game that is going to survive a unit like this with a ton of stratagems. Right? The other thing you could do is throw grenades. So grenades is another D6, on a 4-up, suffer mortal. That's something you could do with the scorpions as well. Someone in the comment section mentioned that, and I actually do like that. I think if you don't have, if you don't have to use Unshrouded Truth, you don't have to use Psychic Shield on them, I think using a free grenades every turn is really good. You're probably going to live with this. This unit's probably going to live about 2 turns, 3 turns. I would say that they should probably get to about turn 3 before they die. If they don't, if they're not living past turn 1, then you better make sure they're trading really efficiently or they're doing something extremely important to prevent your arm. But I mean, other than that, you're doing something. Same thing with a lot of the units in this list. The expendable units are going to be the warlocks, but even then, careful placement can save them. The Shroud Runners, potentially, because of objective play. The Warwalker, potentially, because again, it's gonna poke out, it's gonna shoot something, -1 armor, and then it's probably gonna die. The Warwalker is not as tough as it used to be, right? Really not as tough as it used to be. It's really fragile. And that's really about it, right? The Fire Dragons, by the way, I didn't even mention the Fire Dragons, but they're gonna be kind of looking for opportunities to come in through rapid ingress, which is going to be easier in this detachment. So using other stratagems aside from the core stratagems in the detachment are much easier in this particular detachment because you're getting a bunch of discounts on all your strats, right? You're getting 6 discounts throughout the game. You have Eldrad, you're getting +1 CP every single turn. You have an Autarch, which is giving the unit a free stratagem every turn. And then, of course, with all that extra CP you're going to have, you can swap for secondaries. So, a cool thing to do, and I want to show you guys this real quick, before we kind of end this section of the video is what happens with secondaries on. Well, we have so much extra CP, we don't need to, worry about discarding for CP, or, well, we definitely don't need that. And we don't need to really worry about recycling, right? So on our first turn, we get engaged on all fronts and we get overwhelming force. The overwhelming force is impossible, right? Your opponent is not going to be stupid enough to put a bunch of, units on objectives on turn one, unless, of course, they went first. But sometimes even they're not going to even do that because they want to give up the points. So what we do, we just recycle it for a CP, right? No big deal. Extend it. Wow, look at that. Extend enemy battle lines. So that's great. That's 5 CP or 5 VP that you get for free basically on turn one. That's great. It's great to do it on turn one. Right? If you control one or more objective markers within your deployment zone and one or more objective markers, perfect. 5 CP. 5 VP, not CP, sorry. And then engage on all fronts, which is possible with this army as well because you have Uncharted Truth. You can teleport units anywhere you want. So that could be another 4 VP. So you might be wondering, oh, how do we do that? Right? Well, we look at table quarters here, just on deployment. We show our table quarters. We're in 1, we're in 2, and it's very possible for us to be in 3 and maybe even 4, right? These scorpions right here can move up here if they want to, right? I mean, it might be a little dangerous if your opponent's an assault army, but we kind of talked about that before. We have something that can kind of mess them up with mortal wounds right off the bat, so that's fine, right? Our scorpions can be right here infiltrating up and then have this quadrant covered. And then we can use Unshrouded Truth on this warlock back here. Oh yeah, by the way, this warlock is a singleton as well. We can move this warlock over here. Right? We can just say, oh, you can't overwatch him. And guess what? We've just scored 4 extra points. So on turn 1, we've scored 9 secondary victory points pretty easily. And the great thing about this is now we don't have to worry about these two for later in the game. Engage on all fronts kind of gets harder in the late game. So we're done. So guess what? Discard that, score on that. Next turn. Containment and Cold the Horde. Cold the Horde's probably something we're going to recycle anyway because your opponent doesn't... Well, maybe they do, right? And if they do, that's great. You have an army that can kill Horde units. Except for... Okay, I will say this. There's one unit in particular that you're probably not going to be able to fully kill, and that's going to be Custody units of Wardens. I don't know if they're called Wardens or not, but they're the big guys, the big Terminator-looking guys. You're not going to be able to probably kill them, but you can very easily kill most other stuff. So Cold the Horde can be, something you can kill, but if they don't have it, right, recycle that. Defend Stronghold, easy points on turn 2. Containment is easy points. Especially with an army like this, you just have 2 of your units contained. That's 6 VP, that's 3 VP. They're going to go up another 9. Another 9 points. Let's see, let's look at turn 3. Recover assets might be a little difficult, but guess what? If you don't want to use it because it's action-based, recycle it because you have the CP to do it, right? Storm Hostile objective is just so easy that it's free 4 victory points. Recycle it. Oh, behind enemy lines. Look at that. We can teleport units behind our opponent's lines for 3 VP. So we can score 7 more. You guys get where I'm going with this? This army's incredibly good at scoring points. Every turn, you can teleport a unit somewhere to score points for you. Right? It has the offensive power to kill enemy units as well. So if you draw something like, let's say we draw, I don't know why, okay, I redrew that. That was overwhelming force. Maybe I recycled it by accident. Oh yeah, no, I didn't. Right? Sorry, totally forgot. Yeah, overwhelming force is great now because now you just have to kill enemy units on objectives and it's like turn 4. So your opponent's going to have units on objectives. That's perfect. Right? But the reason we were able to do all this is because we have the CP to spare. We can manipulate the secondary objectives to our advantage. Turn 5. Well, that's turn 4, technically. We did shuffle a couple of them. Bring it down, recover assets. So, recover assets, again, we could just discard it if we don't want it, right? We could recycle it. No prisoners, great, just kill stuff. Bring it down, and no prisoners are like the perfect draws. So, kill vehicles and then kill units, which also, if so facto, count as vehicles sometimes. So, you're scoring double on that. And guys, I'm going to tell you, like, this was my experience with this army. It wasn't just, I'm not just, pulling great secondaries in front of you guys and it's pure luck. This was my normal experience with this army. If I didn't like a secondary objective, I recycled it for a CP and I got a new one. And usually that new one is something you can score because you have the stratagem support to do it. So, guys, this is it for this section of the video. I hope you guys kind of learned something about how to operate with this. It's very effective. I think most of the time, you just have to make sure that your psychers are kind of near most of your units. The singleton warlocks really help with that. If you do want to run warlock skyrunners, they work as well. They are a little faster. The problem is you don't get to teleport them, and they're not characters. So you can't use the Torque of Morag Hague on them because they're not a character anymore. So you do have to watch out for that. I like the singleton warlocks because they are still character units and they can take enhancements and stuff like that, right? They didn't get rid of the character keyword on singleton warlocks. They only got rid of it on the conclaves. So you do want to make sure that you know that. You cannot put an enhancement on a conclave, but you can put an enhancement on a singleton. And they're really good just teleporting around the battlefield doing whatever you need. All right, guys, back to the video where we're going to wrap things up. All right, so in conclusion, the Seer Council is a unique detachment that offers great power that is not obvious at first glance. A lot of people look at it and at first glance they're just like, oh, you just get a bunch of free strats. That's not that good, whatever. But its success does rely on taking a somewhat odd selection of you. So what that means is it's going to take a little bit of looking into and a little bit of, kind of finagling and thinking and really theory crafting to understand how this army works. And also having the game knowledge to know when and where to strike in order to cripple your chances of victory are very paramount as well to this detachment's success. I think it is probably one of the harder detachments to run. And my first game with it was at actually 1,000 points, and I did feel like I kind of dropped the ball in a couple of places with this army. But I think that overall, it's really strong once you start to learn. And I've learned it quickly. I have to say, I've played a couple games with it, and I've kind of already gotten the hang of it. And I know I'm an experienced Eldar player and all that, but it kind of really just fits into my play style of wanting to be an absolute troll. And I think it just does so well at that. Okay, so what is this army? What is the win condition of this army? Well, this army is a control list. So control lists in the past, right, have operated under the assumption that you prevent your opponent from getting to certain spots of the board, or you force your opponent to make really hard decisions about where they want to go. And this is what that army does. It is a control style of army that wants to prevent your opponent from being able to dictate the flow of the battle, their advantage. So your opponent wants to be able to charge and go all in on you. This army is great at stopping that and mitigating that. If your opponent wants to hang back and kind of just, bombard you at range, this army has tools to deal with it, which will make it hard for their opponent. So there's a lot of things that this army can do to make it hard for your opponent to want to do that they want to do. That's what I absolutely about this list. So I'm going to give you guys kind of like a parting piece of knowledge and maybe a prediction. So to be successful with this list, you really do have to kind of focus on a lot of movement and you have to focus on objective, right? You will lose probably about 70% of your army throughout the game, but the remaining 30% is going to be so powerful with the stratagem support and everything like that. Your opponent's going to be basically able to do nothing against. I've played 3 games at 2K with this list, And each and every time, the beginning of the game was very methodical, and I was just scoring a bunch of points. My opponent could not stop all the scoring, right? Even if they tried to deny secondary objectives and stuff, I would just recycle it if I knew that they were going to try to, deny me the ability to score that objective. I would just recycle that one and draw into a new one, which was often better. And to give you an example, there was one instance where my opponent, it was, well, let me put it this way. I drew the Marked for Death secondary objective. My opponent chose 3 units in their backfield, which were pretty inaccessible, right? And I couldn't switch it out because I already did switch out my strategy. They're pretty inaccessible, but they weren't completely inaccessible. So what I was able to do is I was able to just keep it for turn 4. I was able to keep it for 1 turn, and then on turn 5, I was able to blow a hole in my opponent's back lines, and I was able to dump a unit of Storm Guardians with Eldrad into my opponent's backfield. My opponent had a big tank back there. Again, it was my Ultramarines buddy. He had the Gladiator Lancer, and he thought it was pretty much, oh, it'll survive, right? Well, what I did was I turned on everything. I did a grenade stratagem. I just dumped a bunch of CP into killing that thing, and I was able to kill it with 4 Warlocks with Flamers, 4 Singing Spears, and Eldrad, of course. Eldrad was funny. His Mind War actually did something because of the +1 to wound. He was able to actually get a wound on it and get a couple of damage through with his Mind War, which is kind of funny. And yeah, the Guardian fusion guns did some good damage to it, and the Flamers just absolutely finished it off. Just did a ton of damage to the thing. I was wounding on 4s with the Flamers, and it was a great time. I just roasted the vehicle. So my opponent didn't expect that, and my opponent couldn't do anything to stop it in the late game because they had nothing left in the backfield to do so with. So yes, I was able to score Marked for Death. And I did so because I kind of planned around it, right? Like I couldn't score it on turn 4. Knew I couldn't just drop my unit in there. So what I did was I used my Unshrouded Truth to destroy his screening units, and then I followed up with that. So sometimes you have to think a couple of turns ahead with this list as well and think about, okay, I need to get here to do this. So what units do I need to destroy to accomplish that? There's a couple of things you have to think about ahead. Anyway, so that's what I'll leave you guys with. It is a tough list to operate and to pilot, but it can be very rewarding. I don't even think I'm the best with this list yet. I'm going to try my best to, practice this list a lot and get better with it so that I can maybe participate in some tournaments. I actually have most of the models for this army painted. I just need 6 more Warlocks. Which really sucks, guys, because Warlocks are so damn expensive. But if I can get those from China or somewhere, I'll probably be set to go for Warhammer tournaments. I just won't tell you. But whatever. I mean, who cares, right? So anyway, so this is the list I'm going to be piloting for the most part, and that's why I decided to do this video first. I am going to have some other detachment reviews later this week. I have Warhost coming up, but I do want to practice my Warhost list a little bit as well. Just, I have a penchant for Mekdar. I love Mekdar, and Warhost is definitely the best Mekdar detachment there is. So we will go into that probably later this week. I'm thinking on the weekend, once I get a chance to get a game in on Friday with it. I've already played one game at 2,000 points with it because I basically already have that army as well, so I don't have to proxy a lot for it. But yeah, we're just gonna have to see. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I'll see you guys next time. Thank you to so much to all my patrons and supporters for supporting the channel over the last 2 years. Your help has greatly improved and helped it grow significantly. If you do want to become a patron, I will leave the link in the description, and that will give you free access to our Discord. And our Discord is a great place where a bunch of Eldar players love talking about strategies, tactics. Love to have you join us. And lastly, I do have a channel store page that sells Eldar inspired apparel. You can kind of buy some Eldar inspired shirts from and stuff like that. Craft world symbols, Eldar aspect symbols, and stuff like that. Shirts, beanies, hats, all that kind of good stuff. rep your local game store to show your Eldar pride, and it does help the channel as well. Also, I do have an Amazon affiliate link with some of the older stuff, like the old combat patrols and stuff like that, and I will, as soon as Amazon starts selling some of the new stuff, I will update the Amazon for it. So anyway, that's going to be it for today's video. Thank you so much again for watching, and I'll see you guys. Have a good one, everybody. Peace out.